people who signed up for this had an extraordinary increase in muscle strength, which we were able to document, and reaches high statistical significance despite the small number of people involved. And one of the most extraordinary things is VO2 max, which is, it's a measurement of your maximum lung capacity when you're exercising. And it correlates with age-related morbidity and mortality. And VO2 max increased quite a large amount, like 26%. And normally this is something that cannot be achieved unless you're an elite athlete training very hard for long periods of time. And these are people who just, went on our treatment for a year without really trying to augment their physical fitness in any particular way, and yet they saw this as a side effect.
So, hello, Dr. Fahy. You are the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Intervene Immune and the principal investigator for the TRIIM trials. So welcome back to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Richard. It's happy to be here.
So the original TRIIM trial ran from 2015 to 2017, and as I recall, was the first human trial to actually show epigenetic age reversal at the time. So we talked about that. It was about 3 years ago now in quite detail. So we won't cover it again today. I have linked to our previous conversation above. And so if anyone wants to see that detail, please go and watch the previous call. So Dr. Fahy, after the success of TRIIM, you started a new trial, TRIIM-X. But before we dive into that, I had one question, which is, could we talk a little bit about why the thymus is so important, and why does addressing the thymus have such a positive effect on health span and lifespan? Because I think I didn't fully appreciate that kind of last time we spoke.
Yeah, the thymus is essential for longevity because it is the center of production for your T cells. The T cells are the adaptive part of your immune system. So you have more evolutionarily ancient aspects of immune system like natural killer cells and so forth that are essential but not as sophisticated as your adaptive immune system. And it's really the adaptive immune system that suffers the most with aging. So you retain B cell activity reasonably well as you get older. You retain natural killer cell reasonably well as you get older, but your T cell activity declines catastrophically as you get older, particularly as you get to be older than 60 or so. And so I've done some indirect research on the significance of this by looking at statistics compiled by the Center for Disease Control in the United States. And if you add up the likelihood of death from immune system issues such as cancer or infectious disease, your risk of death as a proportion of the total risk of death goes up dramatically with age. So say, for example, at the age of 25, your risk of death is only affected by about 3% in terms of immune system issues. But as you get to be 50, it's more like 50% or 30%. So the curve is exponential. So as you get older and older, your risk of death from immune failure issues increases exponentially and probably turns out to account for at least half the deaths, if not more than half, as you get over the age of 60. As a matter of fact, the ability of your immune cells to recognize foreign antigens declines by about 98% before the age of 80. And so you have to have immune system function in order to stay alive for the long term. And this is a long-term process. The thymus, located here in your breast, under your breastbone, is the center of production of T cells. And that center of production begins to shut down when you go through puberty. The T cells that are produced last for a lifetime, but not for a complete lifetime. They last until about the age of 62 or so, and then they begin to disappear. And that's about the age at which we all begin to die. So that's probably not a coincidence there. So I think that if we do everything else we want to do about aging, we may have great success in many respects, but we'll still die more or less on schedule, because without an immune system function, even young people die. Early on in the AIDS epidemic, immunodeficiency virus killed a lot of very young gay men. And it's because you just have to have an immune system. So I think that we need to have more focus on the thymus than has traditionally been the case. And I think if we do, we'll not only live longer, but we'll live more healthy as well.
Right. So the thymus actually matures the T cells, right? They get produced somewhere else. You still need the T cells, but
you have progenitor cells that are manufactured in the bone marrow, and they're released into the blood, and they develop into different lineages. Some of them go on to form B cells. Some of them go on to form T cells by means of thymus education. So they develop from these precursor cells in the thymocytes in the thymus, and then when they're fully mature, they're released back into the bloodstream as real T cells.
Right. Okay, so turning to TRIIM-X. So I think you're going to have like multiple TRIIM-X's, but you had TRIIM-XA.
Yes.
So is that finished now?
Yes, TRIIM-XA is done. The analysis is not complete, but the trial has been complete for a while now. And so we are now engaged in the lengthy process of figuring out what it all means, which is a multifaceted process.
Okay, so maybe for TRIIM-XA, so what was the intervention and how was it different from the original TRIIM?
Well, the fundamental intervention was the same as TRIIM. So the main purpose of TRIIM-X is to demonstrate that what we saw in TRIIM was not a fluke, was not an accident, was actually something that can be reproduced, and also something that can be extended to people of greater age, perhaps people of less strong health going into the trial, and also to women as well. So we expanded the age range. The original age range was 50 to 65, and we expanded that from 40 to 80. But truth be told, we have very few people under the age of 50. We have many more people over the age of 65. And so the average age of people in the TRIIM-XA trial was about 9 years older than people in TRIIM. And that is including the men and the women in the trial. So the purpose of the trial fundamentally was to reproduce the trial and extend it to larger numbers of people. We enrolled 28 people in TRIIM-XA as opposed to 9 people in TRIIM, and we included both sexes. But there were some small tweaks of the methodology, which it's better not to go into that right now, because it turns out we learned some things from that. And as a result of that, we're going to TRIIM-XB and C as we go forward. And we're halfway through TRIIM-XB right now. And TRIIM-XC, or actually it's going to be technically called TRIIM-XD for reasons I don't want to get into, will capitalize on everything that we've learned up to this point. So as we went through TRIIM-XA, we learned some things. And before we even entered TRIIM-X, I realized that it would be wrong to just reproduce a treatment if we thought that we had ways of potentially improving on that treatment a little bit, around the margins, not by fundamentally changing it, but by seeing if we could modulate it a little bit. And I think the way we modulated it was actually incorrect. So TRIIM-XB is the straight TRIIM protocol without any elaborations, and TRIIM-XD is going to be kind of doing the opposite of what we did in TRIIM-XA. So you might say that TRIIM-XA is kind of more of a worst case scenario. And yet, as we'll get into, we did reproduce the effects of TRIIM anyway.
So at a very high level, the main components in your cocktail Could you talk about what they were?
Yes, yes. As in TRIIM, they remain the same. So growth hormone, metformin, and DHEA. The growth hormone is the component that actually grows the thymus. So the purpose is to actually regrow the thymus. As I mentioned, as you go through puberty, your thymus begins to atrophy. That's a process called thymic involution that leads to the downstream effects of immunosuppression in various ways and autoimmunity. And so we want to reverse that process using growth hormone, but growth hormone has negative effects. And so we're trying to counteract those negative effects using the other two agents, the metformin and the DHEA.
Right. Now, so what you're, okay, so you're trialing these, I guess these three, but it really, it's growth hormone and the other two are in there to counteract the effect. So it's, I guess the intervention that you're trialing is growth hormone, because as time goes on, you review everyone's progress and you tweak it. So you will continue to do that in B and C.
Yes, that's correct. We will continue to do that. But it turns out that even though that was kind of the original way of conceptualizing the trial, the truth is that all three components have their own independent effects, all of which tend to be beneficial for aging in different ways, in complementary ways. So although we have metformin and DHEA in there to block the side effects of growth hormone, they do that in very interesting ways. And they also do that in ways that add to the beneficial effects of growth hormone independently of the effects of growth hormone itself. I think this is one reason that we see the effects that we see on epigenetic age, is that we are doing more than just regrowing the thymus. We're having effects on aging in other ways as well. So I think the whole is more than the sum of its parts, but each part is important as verified by independent research on each one of these agents.
So what did you see, right? So within, you got a set of results, although you're still going through them, but did you see the same as in TRIIM, and what were the key elements that you saw?
Yeah, so the essential things that we're looking for, first and foremost, is effects on the immune system. So we want to know whether we're regrowing the thymus, and we want to know whether we are increasing the output of naive T cells. And you can measure naive T cell output. So naive meaning that the cell is new, it has not encountered any foreign antigen yet, so it hasn't divided too many times. And those are the markers of new T cell production. After a while, the T cells tend to divide, and it's harder to distinguish them from other forms of T cells. But particularly early on, you have something called recent thymic emigrants, which have a particular kind of DNA inclusion body that's lost pretty soon after they come out of the thymus. So if you see an increase in recent thymic emigrants, you can only see that if you've actually increased thymic function. So in fact, we have seen an increase in recent thymic emigrants. So that reproduces the original study. And we've seen an increase in CD4 and CD8 T cell production as measured by indirect methods and also some direct methods as well. So one interesting thing about the epigenetic aging clocks is that they can be used to not only infer what your biological age is, but also to infer what other cell populations are doing in your body, such as naive T cells. And the epigenetic aging clocks actually predict that we're increasing our naive CD4 and CD8 T cells. So we're still in the middle of our analysis of that, but we have some direct results that support that, as well as these indirect results from the aging clocks. So we're pretty pleased to see this. And this is true in people even of advanced ages. And we have not found yet an age beyond which we cannot see positive effects on the immune system. But as I said, we're still in the middle of our analysis, so we have ways to go to really nail that down in detail.
Yeah, just there, I was wondering whether you think like the thymus could get to a point where it's unrecoverable. So it sounds like that doesn't happen.
Well, there's all kinds of
Yeah.
ways that this could play out, but we ran across recently some evidence that suggests that there's still some minimal thymic function even out to the age of 104 to 107 in that range. And if that's the case, then it may be that you can fan those flames back to life again, even at very advanced ages. So one of the things we actually want to do is to extend the age range to beyond 80 at this point. We actually have some people who wanted to get into the trial who were not able to do so before they turned 81, and we'd like to be able to include them. We had a couple people who were quite notable in TRIIM-XA who got into the trial at an age of almost 81, like 80.99 years of age. And so they technically qualified and got in, and they did quite well. One of them took up track racing and started running 5K races and beating his own uh, records and beating other people in the trial, and getting medals that he was very proud of, and bragging that he wasn't even trying and that nothing hurts and things like that. So we love
Oh,
this guy.
yeah.
Another guy was not a track star, but at the end of the trial, he wanted to come back in again because he noticed that he was getting luxurious growth of hair on his legs and elsewhere, and it was turning black again, which we don't have documentation because we took pictures of his hair on his head rather than on his legs or body. But he would like to get back in, and under the current trial rules, we can't let him in. So we're looking to allow people to re-enter the trial after they've been off treatment for a year, and also to enter the trial at ages greater than 80. So that provision is being made right now. We're rewriting the trial plan, and we will be submitting that ASAP to include more people because we really do want to know what the upper age limit is for this. Ultimately, when this becomes a normal thing, when people go in for their aging treatments, they're going to be going in at younger ages. I predict that people will want their thymus regenerated, in their fifth decade of life or sixth decade of life, in their 40s or 50s, when this becomes an ordinary kind of medical intervention. But for right now, there's many, many people who are, getting up there in age, and we would like them to be able to benefit as well if we can show that that's possible. So we would really like to know if there's an upper age limit, and if so, what it is. We don't know that yet.
Do you know magnesium is a critical mineral for cellular function? Perhaps the most important role is being bound to ATP, the currency of cellular energy, as magnesium ATP complex, which is the recognized form of the cofactor required for proper function by hundreds of enzymes. Research suggests that magnesium deficiency can contribute to increased oxidative stress, accelerated cellular aging, and mitochondrial dysfunction. To make sure that we are not deficient and to support optimal mitochondrial function, my wife and I take Magnesium Breakthrough daily. Unlike some supplements offering limited forms, Magnesium Breakthrough is made of all natural ingredients and contains a full spectrum of 7 forms of magnesium to ensure well-rounded support for your cellular health. If you want to boost your mitochondria, simply go to bioptimizers.com/modern and use promo code MODERN10 during checkout to save 10%. Thank you for your support. Could you talk about some of the other effects? You said you mentioned this guy who seemed to be able to run better than before.
Yes.
What other impacts apart from the kind of improvement in the immune system?
Yeah, so this extraordinary effect on physical fitness, which we didn't really notice in TRIIM, but became more evident because we just kept getting testimonials from people that they were bursting with energy. And then in TRIIM-X, we had an opportunity to do something we couldn't do in TRIIM, and that was to test people before and after treatment for their physical fitness in a variety of different ways. Our headquarters in Torrance happens to be at a large medical campus, which has many testing facilities very close to us that allow people to have muscle strength tested and lung capacity, that sort of thing, tested. And so we took advantage of that by allowing people to sign up for these tests on an elective basis. And so we didn't have vast numbers of people doing this, but we did have some. And the people who signed up for this had an extraordinary increase in muscle strength, which we were able to document, and reaches high statistical significance despite the small number of people involved. And one of the most extraordinary things is VO2 max, which is, it's a measurement of your maximum lung capacity when you're exercising. And it correlates with age-related morbidity and mortality. And VO2 max increased quite a large amount, like 26%. And normally this is something that cannot be achieved unless you're an elite athlete training very hard for long periods of time. And these are people who just, went on our treatment for a year without really trying to augment their physical fitness in any particular way, and yet they saw this as a side effect. So we're hoping to document this in more people as we go forward, as we go into the next couple tranches of TRIIM-X. And more people are signing up for this sort of thing because the word is getting out and people are getting more excited about it. So we do hope to have much more data, but we're pretty excited about this so far. This is not something that actually happens with described treatments that we're aware of to this point. Growth hormone makes your muscles big, but according to the scientific literature, it doesn't make your muscles stronger unless you combine it with testosterone, and we don't do that because testosterone is a pro-involuting hormone, as is estrogen. So we don't want to defeat ourselves by involuting the thymus at the same time we're trying to grow it. And yet our people get stronger anyway. And we think it's because of the combination of growth hormone with DHEA and perhaps even with metformin. So this is a very interesting thing. Along with this, we've seen significant reductions in body fat, like the 14% reduction in percent body fat, kilograms of fat loss, increases in lean body mass. And this is really with instructions to people before they even entered the trial not to change their lifestyle. For example, not to change the amount of exercise that they do, because we have to have a measurement against a baseline that's a reliable baseline. So you can't change your baseline, or otherwise we're not sure what's going on. But after a year of treatment, one of the ladies just asked for permission to exercise more. And I decided, if she really is bursting with energy and she just has to do this, maybe that's a treatment effect. So what the heck, go ahead. But even before that, she had these tremendous improvements in muscle strength. So we've seen this actually, particularly in women. In many ways, the women get stronger proportionally to their starting strength, more so than the men do sometimes. But both sexes have shown a benefit. So we're pretty excited about that. I mean, one of the things that is a practical version of this kind of testing is sitting and standing. So if you sit on a stool and you have to sit up and stand down, stand up and sit down as many times as you can in 30 seconds, that's a measure of frailty. And a lot of people, I learned recently, one reason that people have to get institutionalized as they get older is they can't even stand up off the toilet, so they have to have people helping them. They can't do things on their own. And our people showed large improvements in the sit-stand test, even though they all did pretty well to start with. So, this has real-world practical significance if we can improve your strength, also your balance, because, part of being able to sit up and stand down is not falling over in the process of doing that. So if you don't fall over, you don't break your hip, so that extends your lifespan a long time, saves tremendous amounts of money, treating your broken hip. And we think that, sarcopenia is a big problem with aging. And if we're reversing that, giving people greater physical strength, not only, will they last longer, but they'll have a happier life. And, everything will work out better for the people that know them as well.
So did you see gray? So you talked about the guy who actually had darker hair on his body anyway. Yeah. So did you see hair reversal? Get gray hair.
Some of that. Yeah. We did see some of that, but it's subtle. And one thing that we want to be sure to tell people is that if you're interested in our treatment, don't expect it to grow your hair dark again, because that doesn't happen most of the time. Right. It's happened in some cases. And there's one case, one of the guys in our trial is pretty enthusiastic about it. His wife noticed it, just as in TRIIM, the guy's wife is the first one who noticed it. But if you look at the photographs, a lot depends on camera angle and lighting, background lighting, and things like that. So we're trying to standardize that so we can quantify it. But the guy who I was talking about before, the 81-year-old, almost 81 before he started, the guy was already coloring his hair, so we couldn't really measure his head hair change. But his body hair grew in dark. And even my arm hair here was starting to turn white, and that seemed to, when I shaved that off, it grew in dark again. So you can see these kinds of things, but we're still at the beginning stages of learning how this works and how to augment that. We think we may be able to enhance this as we go forward, but it turns out that some of the same genes that you have to activate to regrow your thymus just happen to be the same genes that help to repigment your hair. So we think that, it makes sense mechanistically and biologically, but we think we can actually do better with this particular side effect of growth hormone and the other treatment if we can target it a little bit more. But we will see. We will see.
Okay, so you checked epigenetic clocks, and I think you epigenetic and pheno age.
That's correct.
What did you see with those? And did you ever think about, did you look at the Dunedin pace of aging clock?
Yes, we did. So that we did that, and actually there's a few different dimensions to this. So there was a study that came out late last year evaluating, once again, whether these aging clocks actually predict age-related morbidity and mortality. In particular, do they predict 4-year mortality, and do they predict the incidence of cancer within 2 years? And the answer was positive for at least 3 of these epigenetic aging clocks. The Grimm age clock and the Dunedin pace clock were 2 of them. And I think the pheno age clock was the 3rd one. And we saw aging reversal with all 3 of these clocks. And particularly interesting is that the Dunedin pace clock actually is set up in such a way that you cannot measure reversed aging with it. It can only show a slowing of aging rate, but we saw reversed aging anyway with the Dunedin pace clock. So it couldn't reverse much because the clock doesn't go in reverse, but it did go slightly in reverse. So in other words, we took that meter of aging rate and sent it down to 0 and then some. So and that was pretty cool. So we showed aging reversal in many other clocks as well, including ones that were not evaluated in that study. So in the original TRIIM style trial, we looked at 4 epigenetic aging clocks. In the new study, we looked at 6 of them, and they all went backwards. As you mentioned, what I call the plasma pheno age clock, which is the Morgan Levine version of the pheno age clock, is measured only by plasma measurements. That went back as well. So we have some interesting examples of plasma pheno age going back in reverse. I'm one of the better examples, actually. My clock went back with fewer bumps. Other people's clocks bounce around and do screwy things occasionally, but as long as they end up reversed in the end, then we're happy about that.
Yes.
So yes, so we're seeing positive signs in all these different directions. I will say that the aging reversal that we saw was slower in TRIIM-XA than in TRIIM, and I think it's because of the greater age of the population. I haven't exactly parsed that. I can do a little bit more parsing of that than I have done, but I suspect that's the reason for it, but the magnitude was similar. So I think we're reproducing the same results. So it's very interesting how this is all working out. We don't have enough females yet so far to say much about how the females and males compare to each other. We need a little bit more statistical power on the females, but we have examples of females doing well in the trial. But unfortunately, some of our immune assays have a lot of noise associated with it. And so we're, if we take out all the noisy data and just look at what's left, we see nice results. But we have to do a lot more study before we can hang our hats on the immune results in the women.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, most Healthspan studies show difference, of interventions show difference between male and female. So at least in mice.
Well, yeah, it's too early for us
Yes,
to really say clearly about that. But I can say one thing, and that is the women love it. They seem to be enthusiastic, and some of the people are happiest about the feeling of well-being that they get as a result of being in the trial. And that's worth something by itself. And, I think different people vary in, what they benefit the most from. We have some people entering the trial who are anemic at the beginning of the trial, and the anemia goes away, or at least it gets less. And that's pretty exciting. And, we have other people that have deficiencies in their T cell levels at the beginning of trial, like it's getting to be seriously deficient, and we can correct some of those things. This is not anything we actually intended to do, but again, these are some of the things that we can see sometimes in these volunteers. So different people, I think there's a different spectrum of benefits that we've seen for the volunteers in the trial. And another benefit is lowering PSA risk. Not everybody responds the same way, but some people show a reduction in risk. There was actually a guy who he developed prostate cancer after he ended the trial. It was about a year after he entered the trial. And that was a concern, of course, but we looked back at his ancestral data, up to that point. And what we didn't realize at the time was that he was sort of on a track to get prostate cancer. And we actually interrupted that. We took him back down. His PSAs were rising, and we took him actually back down, and we held him at low PSA scores for a year plus. And then it was only a year after he went off the trial that he sort of resumed where he had left off. So if we had known he was at risk, we wouldn't have enrolled him in the first place. It seemed we actually held him up several times before he enrolled him because we were worried about certain things that we saw. But he seemed to be stable. He had a history of having a high PSA. His doctor seemed to be okay with it, so we let him in. And it turns out he was probably on this track all along. So he probably benefited by, being cancer-free an extra year and a half or longer than he otherwise would have. So, these are just, examples of the sorts of things that we see as we go along that we really never could have sort of predicted in advance.
Yes. So while we're talking about, I guess, like safety concerns and side effects, so did you see any side effects? And are there any safety concerns?
Yes. There are always safety and concerns and side effects, really with any treatment that you undergo. But the main side effects that we see, and this is true in both men and women, and I would say true equally frequently between men and women, and I think a little bit worse than what we saw in TRIIM, and that's probably because of the greater ages of the volunteers, and that is joint and muscle, mostly joint pain and tendon pain. So it's a well-known side effect of growth hormone that, your tendons in this area, your muscles get sore, something called carpal tunnel syndrome, same kind of symptom that you get if you're typing on your keyboard all day on the computer. And that's caused by changes in muscle growth and tendon, growth and things like that. Things can pull on each other. Fortunately, those sort of symptoms are reversible. They go away after the treatment is over. And I think there's a side effect of good things that are going on, but they affect about a third of the people involved. And mostly they're not serious enough that we have to worry about them too much, but we can adjust the way that the treatment is applied in many cases to get rid of them. In other cases, the volunteer simply refuses to stop treatment. He says, okay, I have these symptoms, but I love these feelings that I'm getting. I love the benefits I'm getting out of this. So I'm not going to go off this. I can handle it. So they handle it to the end of the trial, and then they're done, and the symptoms go away. But there have been a couple cases in which the side effects have been so bad in certain people that they've actually had to discontinue treatment. So that's unfortunate, and that's just the way that it is right now. One of the things that we hope to do in the future is to get a little bit more sophisticated about how we're regrowing the thymus so that we can actually reduce the dose of the growth hormone a bit so that these secondary effects, these side effects, go away. And we're not there yet, but we have some promising avenues toward doing that sort of thing. And we have a drug discovery program behind all of the stuff that we're currently putting into clinical trials. And we hope to get into some greater sophistication as we go along, so we can get rid of some of these side effects. But yeah, these some of the problems of joint problems, are caused by a really interesting and I think positive side effect, which is that as we get older, we tend to develop arthritis, and part of that has to do with wearing out of cartilage. The cartilage, in our joints, tends to die off and not get reproduced. So you get bone on bone problems, which is very painful. But growth hormone actually can regrow cartilage. But when we go through puberty, the epiphyses in our joints close off, so your bones cannot actually grow. The linear length of your bones cannot grow anymore. Growth hormone doesn't know that. It just wants to make your bones grow and make your cartilage grow. And so in a closed joint, you can run into a conflict of interest in which things are butting against each other, and that can be painful for a while. But our theory, and of course it's only a theory, is that after all of that subsides, after we take off that positive driver of regeneration of the cartilage, that the cartilage now has been built up and it will last longer. So your risk of ultimately getting these kinds of arthritic changes may be reduced. It's speculation. It will take many years before that would be possible to demonstrate, but makes us feel better, that if we're actually causing some discomfort in the short run, maybe that's worth it in the long run because it'll have an actual benefit, but, remains to be seen.
Right. Yeah, I did see that you were saying you were looking for an alternative to growth hormone. It's because growth hormone has these side effects, and you like to figure out some other way of doing it.
Largely the reason, right?
Yeah.
We don't want a complete alternative to growth hormone because we actually like growth hormone. Growth hormone combats aging in very powerful and fundamental ways, and we like those effects. So we don't want to get rid of growth hormone, but we want to make growth hormone smarter, you might say. And we have ways of doing that are on the drawing board that you'll hear about, over the coming years.
Okay, that does sound very exciting. Actually, so that was one question I had. Okay, so like the normal advice for longevity is you want to tamp down growth when you get older. It's what rapamycin does, slows mTOR. But you can, and you want to have low IGF-1, but I saw that IGF-1 being positive, being high was a good sign in the TRIIM. So do you agree that they're kind of different, and why is your approach different, I guess?
Yeah, so let's start answering that by mentioning that there's a song that was put together by an old rock band called the Byrds, called Turn, Turn, Turn. There's a time and a season for every purpose under heaven. And there's an actual line in that song that says there's a time to build up, there's a time to tear down. So the mTOR proponents, the people who like to inhibit mTOR, they're intent on tearing down. But if you do nothing but tear down, eventually there's nothing left. And so you have to build up as well. And so growth hormone is the other side of that. So if mTOR was nothing but bad, you wouldn't have it in the first place. Evolution would have gotten rid of it. So you need to have anabolic pathways. You need to have the building up side of things. And you may notice that when you're young and running around at the age of 12, you're building everything up as fast as you possibly can, and you show no signs of aging to speak of, other than thymic involution, I might add. But it turns out that mTOR is essential for the maintenance and development of the thymus. And so inhibiting mTOR is a really bad idea if you want to sustain your immune system. But there's a time to every purpose under heaven, right? So there's a time to build up and there's a time to tear down. So you don't want to always be inhibiting mTOR, and you don't want to always be building up mTOR or building up anabolic processes. So the way that we do our treatment is we regrow your thymus for a year, and the process of growing your thymus for a year, and by the way, growing up your muscles for a year as well, that generates T cells. And if those T cells last for 20 years, like the T cells lasted when you were 20, then you don't need to continue to build things up all that long. You can go back to, inhibiting mTOR if that's what you want to do, and you'll still be okay because your T cells are already there and you benefit from them. But then when you need some more, then you can reverse that process again and regrow your thymus again and replenish your immune system with fresh T cells once again. So I think that the idea that all you want to do is inhibit mTOR is a very simple-minded view of aging. Aging is a very complicated, well-orchestrated process that involves every possible thing you can think of, pushing and pulling in every different direction, and it has to be that way because the body is a homeostatic system. You need to be able to have push as well as pull, and we're doing the push part and other people are doing the pull part. In the end, I think you need both. You cannot have health if you don't have both, and it's the art of it is figuring out how to balance those things out. And I would also say something else, which is in the TRIIM treatment itself, metformin actually is an mTOR inhibitor, even though growth hormone is an mTOR augmenter. So we have contradictions that we like that are actually built into our treatment as it is. So it's not all anti-mTOR, but it's not all, pro anabolism either.
The main aim is to regrow the thymus and to improve the immune system. So do you think that the growth hormone is increasing the strength directly? So it's not like the growth hormone improves the thymus and then the thymus improves the muscles. It's like the growth hormone directly improves the muscles and the VO2 max.
Yes, I think so. But there are other situations in which it may go in the first direction, in which you build up the thymus and then the thymus turns around and builds something else up. And this goes back to examples that I frequently mention in these interviews that are under-recognized by the biogerontology community, but which are in the scientific literature. And if you're a mouse and you're aging, you may lose 80% of the beta receptors in your brain. But if I give you a young transplant of a thymus, you gain all of those beta receptors back again. If you're an old mouse, you may double the amount of DNA in each of your liver cells. So you have a tetraploid liver. But if I give you a thymus transplant, the liver cells divide and you go back to a normal diploid liver with all of the right amount of DNA per cell. That's without any growth hormone being involved or anything else. That's just the thymus. So the thymus has effects on aging processes elsewhere in the body that are yet to be understood. And so we think part of the anti-aging effect that we're seeing body-wide is mediated through the thymus, but part of it is not. Part of it is mediated directly by growth hormone. So we know the growth hormone grows the thymus. It also grows your kidneys. It also grows your liver. It also grows your spleen. It also grows your skin. And you need all of these things if you want to be a healthy human being. So, we like these quote unquote side effects of growth hormone that are reversing loss of cells in your body. And you need cells if you want to have health. So it's all it's a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. The thymus seems to have some magic, and the growth hormone and the other agents have some magic of their own.
You went through TRIIM-X, right, this time.
I did.
What was your experience like?
I liked it. It was good. I didn't notice any change. I've always been kind of young for my age, but so I don't, if you're already in great shape, you're less likely to notice a benefit than if you're not. But after I was in the trial for several months, I just realized walking to my office in my home one day that, I feel really good. And so I just decided to just drop down on the spot and see how many push-ups I could do. And I did 90 push-ups right on the spot. And when I was young, paying attention to push-ups, I could only do 77 at the most. So I thought, hey, this is pretty cool.
Wow.
So I can attest, to having that feeling myself. I can understand, this feeling of energy and vitality. You just feel more alive in some ways. So I won't say that continued indefinitely, because you get used to everything, right? And
right.
When you're 15, you don't really notice that you feel like you're 15, right? After a while, it wears off. But it doesn't. But it's a good sign that you can feel things, at least in the beginning. And many people have felt better, just in different ways on the trial, and that's reassuring. That's reassuring. That's what we would hope to see. But yeah, it's not true for everybody, but the fact that it's true in some people is encouraging.
Yes. Okay, so what is the commercial plan? So you're doing these trials, and you have some more trials planned, which is great.
We do. Yes.
What is your plan to turn this into a therapy that can be delivered?
Yes. So we actually have multiple plans that will be implemented in a kind of a layered fashion over time. So every company has kind of a pipeline of products along the way. We have pipelines as well in mind. Some of them are just laboratory ideas right now that will be developed in the products. Some of them involve known technology that has been abandoned by others that we can pick up and use to our advantage. Things that have already gotten into human clinical trials successfully, but never panned out for other purposes that can be used for our purposes, or orphaned drugs kind of thing. But just with the straight protocol that we're doing now, and minor, improvements on that protocol, we already are going to be experimentally launching clinical activities in the UK before the end of the year.
Wow.
Yes, there's a group of very bright doctors who are so enthusiastic about what we've done that they just want to try it. And so we're going to try this on a trial basis. So we have developed software. So as you mentioned earlier, there are three main components of the treatment. There's also some nutrients that are included that we've talked about in the past. And generally speaking, it turns out to be much, much, much more complicated than you would imagine. Figuring out how to adjust the dose of each of these three major components as you go along, because I've actually we've put together an expert system that takes into account over 100 different factors that go into just choosing the direction of each one of the changes in these three things. You wouldn't think it could be that complicated, but actually it really is, because so many things are going on. We have to pay attention to a lot of different things that are going on. We measure all kinds of blood levels of different items in the blood, and we try to look at the person holistically and what's going on with them, and try to figure out what's the best course for them. And there are contradictions. There are indices that say increase this, and there are some things that say decrease that, and you have to decide what's more important and what's the hierarchy and all of this. And to ask a naive physician, even a good, smart physician, to figure all of this out on the fly it's unreasonable. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen correctly. I spend tremendous amounts of time on this myself, and I've been doing this for years. So we've been developing the expert systems to make this possible, and we're going to be testing this more and more. So far, the expert system has made appropriate calls every time that we've tested it recently, and that's going to be necessary for deploying this. It's also going to be helpful for us to retain control over the treatment, because doctors really need to work with us in order to do this correctly. And we're not going to license the use of this technique to clinics that aren't doing it correctly. So if the clinics are following our protocol with our software and reporting their data back to us so we can continuously refine that software, and we know that they're going to be maximizing efficacy and minimizing any harmful side effects. And at the same time, our expert system, which will be converted into an AI over a fairly short amount of time, will get stronger and stronger, and we'll be able to do a better and better job of expanding this. So this is the way that we can develop the treatment into something that can be uniformly applied by many different doctors, many different clinics around the world, in a way that is consistent, in a way that is correct, in a way that continues to feed back on us to make it even better. So, there are many different people. One of the things that makes it so complicated is that everybody's an individual. People respond differently to the same stimulus. And sometimes it's not apparent what's going on for a while. And sometimes the body changes, the body actually adapts to some of the treatments, and you have to adjust for that as you go along. So it gets very, very complicated. So you need to have a uniform way of dealing with all of this so that you get a uniform result. And you need that sort of thing to minimize variations in outcome that blur the statistics, that make it harder to get FDA approval. So this clinic that we're working with now is operating in a jurisdiction in which they don't need regulatory approval. In the United States, you need the FDA to approve this. The FDA has looked at our treatment and decided that even though all three components of our treatment are vanilla as far as the FDA is concerned, and the FDA is not actually worried about our treatment. They're not, it doesn't bother them, but they consider it a new drug entity. And I have to say, I agree with them about that, because the combination does things that none of the three components do by themselves. So it really is an interaction between these three things that we're taking into the clinical market in the United States. So I have to agree with the FDA that it needs to be seen as such. And so we're going to be going down a regulatory pathway that the FDA will approve. And meanwhile, we'll have some jurisdiction in which we can operate more freely and expand our range of experience. And we can bring all of this together so that whatever we submit to the FDA in the end will be informed by the largest number of experiences possible. But meanwhile, it won't be held up indefinitely, by, the regulatory process, because it can be sort of introduced gradually and slowly in different ways as we feel our way along. So I think this is an appropriate way to go. It kind of strikes a balance between the fact that people have an immediate need for aging interventions and the fact that you don't want to go headlong into something that might have complications that you haven't discovered yet. So, I think this sort of gradual, thoughtful, scientific approach is appropriate and will get us into the clinic. And if we can make this a scalable process in spite of all the complexities, and we think we can do that, then it can be expanded to millions and millions of people. And if we're doing this in a way that brings revenues back to us as a company, we will benefit, and even as the patients, benefit all over the world. So that's kind of the plan. That's the straightforward plan.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Other ways that we will, open up markets will be to improve the therapy in various ways by developing our own biologic agents. We've recently discovered an agent that seems to, I'll just say in my own case, because we have limited experience, we're testing this in other people now. We tested in Bobby and myself. We found that this other completely novel agent was able to reverse our aging based on these epigenetic aging clocks. Actually, in this case, it's just the plasma pheno-age clock. I have to correct myself there. But I showed a slide in Berlin earlier this month showing that in my case, when I entered the TRIIM-XA trial, my plasma pheno-age went back about 4 years, and it took about a year to do that. But with this novel agent all by itself, I went back 6 years in about 90 days. And then I've done limited trials on myself, combining the two treatments, and that we get similar results, if not even more robust results when we combine the two. So we may be able to augment the benefits of the TRIIM protocol by combining it with this other novel agent. So we have a lot of things like that we're working on that we haven't been able to talk about yet, but we have a lot of opportunities to commercialize our goals, which are basically to deal with the thymus first and foremost, but aging in general, as we're able to expand out into more detailed studies of aging more globally.
Right. So I know that like pricing, especially in medicine, is generally not related to, I guess, to cost. But I mean, it did concern me, like just the complexity of the solution and the way that certainly in the trials you're constantly reviewing would mean that the cost would have to be reasonably high because of the amount of intervention.
Yeah, because of the amount of brain power that's required to, figure out how to administer this treatment. If we could just take a pill, like a lot of other treatments, it would be a lot simpler. We're not quite there yet. We may get closer to that over time. I anticipate that what we will discover over time is that I don't want to say patient because, we're treating people who are not sick, but, let's say volunteer categories or in the future, maybe even patient categories will be discovered in which we can say, okay, based on this, that, and the other thing, we can put you in category A, B, C, D, or E. And that means that you will follow this kind of course or this kind of course or that kind of course. And then if we can do that, we may be able to make this a lot simpler. We're not there yet, but eventually we may be able to get there. In any case, yes, so the cost is partly labor, it's partly brain power, but that's one reason to introduce these computer docs, essentially, these computer assistants, because then, one of the problems with medicine today is, at least in the United States, you go in to see your doctor and he spends 10 minutes with you and then gives you a pill and sends you on your way, right? That you can't possibly understand much, about a patient's general health with that short of an exposure to that patient. And then you see the patient 2 years later and you've forgotten everything you knew about the patient before. So we need to make these things efficient, right? Because that's all the time the doctors have for you. And so if the doctor can just plug your numbers into us, essentially, he downloads the patient results to us, goes into our computers, it gets processed by our AI, comes back to him with the dose updates for that person for the next 3 months or whatever, the next 6 months. That's doable. He can do that, and he'll get paid, because he's offering the service. The patient will pay him. We'll get a referral. We'll get our cut of that, and the patient will benefit, and the doctor will benefit. We'll benefit. Everything will work out. I think that's the only way to do this at this point. But I think we can do it.
So apart from aging, right? So there are other immune things like there's autoimmune diseases and so on.
Yes.
Are you looking at other kind of indications?
We absolutely are. We absolutely are. So I actually do work in organ preservation as well as in aging, and we normally use a model in which the organ donor receives the same organ back after he's treated, so that we don't have to deal with immune rejection issues. But we have a collaboration going now which calls for an allograft model in which you transplant from one donor to a different recipient. And once we get that model up and running, and we're working on setting that up now, then we can look at means of preventing rejection of the organ. And autoimmunity, which you just brought up, is an analogous problem. It's a little bit worse than allograft rejection, but it's the same basic problem. And essentially what's happening with autoimmunity is that the body is forgetting who it is. You know, that type 1 diabetes, for example, everything is fine, you don't have diabetes, but you catch a virus, and the immune system clears out the virus, but the virus looks like an antigen in your pancreas associated with production of insulin, and so your body now accidentally attacks that antigen as well as that virus. The virus is gone, but the autoimmune condition continues, and you wipe out your insulin producing cells, and now you're diabetic. That can be reversed. So there are experimental models involving the thymus, which allows the body to relearn, you know, that is not a foreign antigen, that's not an invader, that's self. Don't kill off those cells. And it's not been tried in humans much, almost not at all. There's a tiny, you know, study on like 2 or 3 pediatric heart transplant patients that never got published. But basically, it hasn't been looked at in people because in order for this to work, you have to have a functional thymus. And most people who develop autoimmunity in old age, or that develop the need for organ transplants, they develop that latter need when they're old. And so they don't have thymuses to speak of. And so nobody's really thinking about using a thymus that's practically gone to reverse these conditions. But we don't have that constraint. If we can regrow your thymus, then we can use what I've called thymic magic to reprogram your immune system to accept anything that you want as self. So that can be a foreign organ, or that can be a part of your body that is currently mistaken to be a foreign substance. And the animal models have proven this over and over again, especially in small animals. There have been promising signs in larger animals, but not any great success yet. So as we set up our own allograft model, which will be a kidney transplant model, we will try to show that we can do this in a larger animal, a rabbit model. And if we can do that, then it's just a few additional steps to apply that to humans, and to apply that in a way that could cure essentially all pre-existing autoimmune diseases, as well as get rid of transplant rejection. So those are big areas, potentially massive money makers for us as a company, of course, but would release a tremendous amount of human suffering. Obviously, indirectly is going to extend the human lifespan too. Actually, organ transplants have probably extended the lifespan of humans more than any aging intervention that's ever been tried. Because we die of organ failure, right? Particularly heart failure. And if you replace the heart and you get another 10 years or 20 years out of that, that matters. That matters. So we're attacking, you know, aging and its attendant processes and problems in a multitude of ways, all of which come back to the thymus in the end. So we think we're well positioned. We have a central role in many different spokes of the wheel, you know, that are involved in turning, you know, the ship of aging around, hopefully.
Right. So from all the work you've done so far, I mean, it sounds actually like it's too complicated, but are there any takeaways? Is there anything that someone could mimic at home? I mean, apart from like injecting growth hormone into themselves.
Yeah, we don't encourage that because
No,
you can't get into side effects and problems. And like I indicated, it's a very complicated thing. But so I would say do all the things that everyone else tells you to do. You know, do things that I don't do, like get plenty of sleep, get plenty of rest, reduce stress. I don't do any of those things, but you should all do all of those things. Eat well, right? I'm not a vegetarian. I think that being a complete vegetarian is probably overkill and probably counterproductive, but I'm not an expert in that area. I would suggest you eat a Mediterranean diet, that you emphasize plants, but don't exclude animal protein entirely, because it's good for you to some extent. And again, speaking as a non-expert in that subject, I just think that we humans have a long history of eating everything on the planet that comes in our path. And so, I think we're adapted to that, and that we don't have to be too extreme about the choices that we make. I think in life, balance counts for a great deal. So,
Yeah.
Have a happy life, have friends, have connectedness to other people, be a nice person, because that will be good for you. And take it easy. Don't stress out things too much. Laugh, have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And, things will tend to work out. I read a book on, supercentenarians when I should have been studying for my finals for my PhD exam, because the latter was too boring. And, it turns out that a lot of the people who make it to the age of 100 have very boring lives. I think that the message that I take from that is, don't stress out, right? Take it easy.
Right. So you're recruiting for TRIIM-B. If people want to join,
Yes.
what are the conditions, and
Right.
how do they do that?
Yeah, we're actually recruiting for the final tranche of the TRIIM trial, the most sophisticated version of it right now. We haven't launched that yet, because I have to do some work on the trial protocol and get that approved. But the way to get involved in that is to contact me, or even better, to contact our trial coordinator, Grace. So you can do that by writing to grace@interveneimmune.com. It's all spelled exactly the way it should be spelled. It's all one word, all lowercase, including the word grace is lowercase, and you'll get in. So if you can remember, Grace's name, then you can write to us. If you can't, you can write to me at fahy@interveneimmune.com. Tricky spelling on that, Fahy. And I'll refer you to Grace. And Grace will lay out all the ground rules of the trial, tell you all the things that you need to be able to do in order to enter the trial. And you'll take a questionnaire. We'll make you take an online questionnaire to get an idea about your history, your medical history, what medical conditions you may or may not have, whether you have a strong family history of cancer or not, because we don't want to put people at risk of cancer. We are giving you growth factors. We're giving you more than one growth factor, so we don't want to endanger anybody. And then if you look good on your questionnaire, you'll go in and have a pre-screening blood draw done, which will measure all kinds of different things to see if you have any risks that you don't know you have. We have discovered risks in people that they had no idea that they had. We discovered people who had prostate cancer when they tried to get into our trial, and we informed them of that, and that they were able to learn of their problem early and get treated as a result of that. They're all doing well, by the way. So early detection is a really good thing. So that's an indirect benefit of contacting us about getting into the trial. Sometimes even if you don't get into the trial, you benefit from contacting us. And so if you pass all of these pre-screens, and you can comply with our rules, which require you to not do things like pick up on the latest anti-aging drug 6 months into the trial, because we won't be able to understand your results if you do that. Then we can schedule time to enroll you. And we're still enrolling people, and look forward to doing so for many years.
And there is a cost associated with joining the trial.
There is a cost associated with joining the trial. We have not caught on that well yet with the big venture capitalist community. So we don't have a lot of money to throw around. So we cannot afford to pay for your trial costs. We can't really make money off of your trial participation at the moment. But we do require you to cover your costs. So you'll hear all about the details of that. That depends partly on whether you're male or female, depends partly on whether you're big or small. But the cost is around 18,000 a year right now for most people overall. That includes the cost of a physician who supervises your every move along with me. I don't charge for my services, but we have to pay him. The benefits of this will be not only the treatment benefits, but also the ability to monitor your own health using endpoints that your doctor will not normally measure. And you'll get a lot of feedback about how you're doing as you go forward. And you may learn some things about yourself you didn't know. So we'll see.
Excellent. Yes, no, that all makes great sense. One final question, actually. So are you still taking carnosine? And
yeah, I am. So I backed off on carnosine for a while because it might have had an interaction with my prostate, but I think it's fine at this point. Yeah, so I take carnosine. I still take carnosine. So yeah, I still swear by that.
You still see that as helping with muscle strength?
Well, potentially.
Right.
So I actually have a patent on using carnosine, but I can't enforce it, so it doesn't matter. I have a patent that involves a combination of carnosine with something else for reversing telomere shortening, or at least inhibiting telomere shortening. But you can use the carnosine by itself to hopefully do something positive for your muscles and your stem cells in general. So the thing that got me really interested in carnosine in part was an experiment we've done many years ago, in which so your viewers would also all know about the Hayflick limit. If cells divide a certain number of times in culture, they go nuts and they turn into these things that the press is called zombie cells, which are these grotesquely swollen, misshapen cells that are spewing out nasty mediators into the medium surrounding them and everything, and just don't work well at all. And it turns out that if you induce that state in a cell and you put enough carnosine into the medium surrounding them, they go back to normal. So one reason that we get weak is that our satellite cells, which are muscle stem cells, don't repair muscle the way they should. And part of that is due to the fact that they exist in an aging body, but maybe there's a few things that go wrong with them as well. And maybe some of them approach the Hayflick limit. And if you can reverse that by using carnosine, then you may do yourself a favor. You may maintain your muscle strength more effectively into old age. And the unanswered question is, well, if it maintains your muscle strength, well, what about other stem cells? Is it maintaining those as well? Maybe it's maintaining your bone marrow stem cells, which are really important for ultimately feeding raw material to whatever little thymus you may have left, so you can better maintain your immune system. So there may be other things that are benefited from it as well. And I think it's mostly a black box. It's something that nobody's studied. Nobody knows anything about it, to my knowledge. It's all speculation on my part, but all I know is that I'm as strong as I ever was, and I'm 74. So I'm supposed to be kind of weak by now. So, and I'm not. So, maybe it's got something to do with carnosine. Who knows?
Yes, you are doing very well. Okay, real last question. So where can people go to find yourself and all your work?
So you can find us online. We have a website called www.interveneimmune.com. And that would have addresses for myself and our CEO. So contact information. There's information in there about the basis, the rationale for the trial, the background of the trial, some of our results. And there's also information about some of the attention that we've gathered from the media and so forth in there. So you can kind of get some links to some of the presentations that we've given. And of course, we've given many other presentations, including to you, Richard, in the past. And I know some of that's out there. I'll just give you a quick compliment here. I thought you did a nice job of covering us before. So, of course, I had to agree to give you an interview again.
Okay.
But yeah, you can find us in all kinds of ways. If you just search for Fahy, Fahy, and Thymus, you'll probably find me. I haven't really tried that, but most likely you'll find that. If you search for Fahy and Horvath, who's the guy who started these epigenetic aging claws, and Aging Cell, which is where we published our first paper, that'll take you right to our first paper. You can find that. So I don't think we're too hard to find. We're kind of all over the place out there. One of the good things that we've experienced is there's been a lot of interest in what we're doing, and we really appreciate that. And we just want to make sure that that we live up to all of the hope that we're generating, both on the part of others and frankly on the part of ourselves. So, you know, hopefully that will continue to be the case.
Will you be publishing TRIIM-XA, a paper on that?
Well, we want to do that, but as I indicated to you before, we learned some things in TRIIM-XA that complicate the story. So it's, if we publish just TRIIM-XA, it's like telling half the story. I think we would prefer to tell the whole story. So unfortunately, that means that we have to include TRIIM-XB, but also TRIIM-XD or TRIIM-XC, on what we rename it. And unfortunately, we haven't even started TRIIM-X, D or C, whatever we call it. So unfortunately, it's going to be frustrating because it's going to take a while. So in the short run, we're going to have to content ourselves with some of these public presentations, and the public will have to sort of keep up with us along the way that way. Maybe we can publish little chunks of this that don't depend on the other parts or whatever. We'll have to see about that, but we'll do our best. That's all I can say.
Yes. Well, you have so much data. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fahy. It was great talking to you, and thank you so much for joining us again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.